Well, hey there, guys. How you doing tonight? Welcome to my live stream. Great to have all of you here tonight. Let's see. We've got luscious Jules. Hey, Jules. Hope you're staying good and warm over there in the east central south part of the U.S. Shelley, we've got you. Hi, Shelley. Nice to see you. And we've got Miss Posterity. Hey guys, thanks for being here, and some others are out there watching. We've got some exciting material to talk about tonight, and I think you're gonna enjoy this. Hello, Omega. How are you doing? So, I'm getting a little better at using Ecamm Live, so I think I've got the functionality down a little better. So I hope you're all doing fine wherever you are. Most of you are probably in the U.S., with whatever storms you've been dealing with. And it looks like we've got some more coming in, this weekend. So, in fact, I got to tell you, I was going to be part of a Bigfoot event in Washington, D.C. this weekend. I say it was going to be a showing of the film A Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot, where I'm in it for a few minutes, and I was going to come and answer questions. And then Ronnie LeBlanc was going to be there the next day doing a book presentation about his new book about Bigfoot called Interdimensional. And I was all set to go tomorrow, but due to this possibly severe weather event again this coming weekend, the event was canceled. So I won't be in DC. I think it might have been the first Bigfoot event ever in DC. It's kind of interesting if you think about the timing of it, right? I've never heard about any Bigfoot events in Washington, D.C. I mean, we could make Bigfoot a political issue, right? And get it on the political agenda. I mean, really, it's a serious issue, actually, for people that encounter these phenomena and creatures like that out wherever they encounter these. And a lot of it happens in national parks, national forests, BLM land. So the federal government does have kind of responsibility here to a degree for people's experiences on those lands. I mean, they have a legal connection to it. So at some point, we're going to have to address it, I would think, in Congress to acknowledge the phenomena. I have a petition on change.org/protect Bigfoot, just to recognize Bigfoot as some life form species that's here with us, whatever she may turn out to be. So if you want, you can go check that out to eventually, get some attention to this issue. Anyway, the Bigfoot event will be rescheduled for another time. So welcome again. What I want to do tonight is present information about this Ukrainian 1982 Ukrainian missile incident, which weirdly enough, I have some sort of indirect connection to, which I'll explain to you in a second through U.S. experts that talk to top Soviet scientists there about actually what happened. So I've known about this event. I know it goes back into the 80s. I only heard about it more recently, like 15 years ago or so. So we'll get to that in a second. What I wanted to share with you first, I thought I would share with you this Robert Frost poem, which I've always enjoyed. Here we go. This is a poem by Robert Frost. It's called Fire and Ice. Some say the world will end in fire. Some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if I had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. Thank you, Robert Frost. Apparently, he came up with this poem in the 1920s after talking to an astronomer about how the world was going to end. So it's a little good introduction here. So let's get on with our presentation. So, what we want to talk about is this event that happened in Ukraine. It was back then part of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union at the time, if you'll remember, comprised um, a lot of different countries, and Ukraine was one of those countries that was part of the Soviet Union, um, which came apart in the early 90s. And I had heard about this event first from a guy named Dr. Richard Hoover, who you can see in this picture in the middle. I met, and that's John Alexander on the left there, um, who's also written books about paranormal phenomena, UFOs. His participation in one of these programs, I believe it was one of the early Pentagon programs called the Advanced Physics Research Group. No, Jules, it was in 82. Yeah, we'll get to the dates in 1982. John participated in what was called the Advanced Theoretical Working Group. I believe it was part of the Pentagon. And he said, you call it that so people don't know it's a UFO study program, right? And that fits with what James Lukatsky has told us about OSAP, right? Arrow told us that OSAP was some sort of what the title sounds like, Advanced Aerospace Weapons Special Application Program. But Lukatsky, if you read his three books, he's saying, he has said recently to George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell that he is saying everything in that book that he's legally allowed to say. It's a UFO program that, because the research showed that there are paranormal aspects to UFO sightings. As Lukatsky said, a UFO sighting is more than a UFO sighting. It went off into remote viewing, Bigfoot, cryptids, time slips, and other ball lightning, other phenomena, which he says is still going under the name Project Kona Blue, which we were told a year ago was an unfunded project when we learned about it. But Lukatsky says it's still going. Anyway, John Alexander was part of one of those programs. They don't call it a UFO program so that you can't find it. Yeah, that's how it works. But I met this guy, Richard Hoover, very interesting fellow, who had worked. This is a very interesting story. This is at the International UFO Congress in was it Fountain Hills, Arizona, outside of Scottsdale, on a Native American reservation there. 2015. It used to be the International UFO Congress used to be held in Laughlin, and then it was kind of consolidated into Arizona, MUFON, and it moved to Arizona. Anyway, what I learned from Hoover, he was a former NASA astrobiologist who told us that there was unequivocal evidence in carbonaceous meteorites that had landed on Earth. If you opened them up and looked inside, you found fossils. You found remnants of carbon-based fossils, single-celled organisms called diatoms, and other bacteria that he said he told me if you found them in rocks on Earth, you'd be 100% confident they're fossils, right? Just like we find fossils of big organisms. And these, he said that NASA told him not to talk about it. And he found out, he kept wondering why they didn't want him to talk about it. It were people in there that had religious beliefs that there was no life beyond Earth, secretaries who were blocking his papers and so forth. And then he eventually was told, we don't want you going to conferences. They prohibited him from talking about extraterrestrial life, single-celled organisms, bacteria in meteorites. He was not allowed to talk about this at science conferences. This is someone with many, many patents, and I believe if you look it up, over 300 peer-reviewed published papers. This guy is an expert in extremophiles. These are types of life forms that live in the Antarctic. They live in volcanic vents under the ocean, even nuclear power reactors. These types of life forms that are really strong, even the ones that can survive um, in space, like the tardigrades. You know, those cute little bear-like creatures. They look like little bears that can survive in a vacuum. Okay, for some reason, NASA found this to be extremely controversial. Yes, diatoms, Jules. Very beautiful. If you look up diatoms, these beautiful patterns and so forth, organisms that are made of minerals and things, they look really cool. Um, so Hoover told us that he eventually quit over this because he found it so intolerable that he's one of the world experts in extremophiles. He's finding remnants of these extremophiles in meteorites that are crashing in Australia. I think it's the Orguelia meteorite and Murchison meteorite, some from India. And I spent a bunch of days talking to this guy because he was so fascinating, so high level in terms of his level of expertise. And he eventually asked them who is telling you not to talk about uh, extraterrestrial fossils? And he was told it was the White House. The White House was saying we don't want to offend religious groups. And that means that was in 2016. This would have been the Obama White House, folks, believe it or not. The Obama White House was, according to Hoover, telling NASA we don't want to hear about life outside of Earth right now. And the presentation that Hoover gave us, you can actually find it online if you look for it. I put a link in the description of this video to the video I did about Hoover, and you can find his presentation that we saw. He also showed us very interesting images of Mars that he said showed that there were bacteria that were turning green in the summer times of year and then fading away in the winter. Evidence of water on Mars, evidence of life on, cellular level of life on Mars. So what he finally told me was that, and to the whole group, is that there is a timeline that NASA has of releasing information about extraterrestrial life. And that's sort of basically what they told him indirectly is we have this timeline for releasing this information to the American public and the world, and you're going too fast for us. So he quit over this, this just a really high level person. Very interesting story. Well, I ended up writing about this in my book, Black Swan Ghosts. This is now the second edition of Black Swan Ghosts, but I wrote about it in the first edition. And here is one of the stories, which is what we're going to talk about tonight, because this is what he told me when we were talking. This just came out, okay? And I had his permission to write about it because he literally rewrote the chapter for the book. He said, I want to make sure you get this right, so send me the chapter. And he not only edited his chapter, these are stories I collected from different people, like, with people I've met at conferences and people from the military whose parents were in the military, witnesses to extraterrestrial alien beings, whoever these beings are. About 15, now 18 encounters in the updated version, which came out last summer. Hoover, this is the story that Hoover told me. Okay. It's about Muradin A. Komakhov, this top-level Soviet scientist that was visiting the U.S. in the 90s, and I think NASA asked Dr. Richard Hoover to host Komakhov. And Komakhov was the director of the Kurchatov Institute. Now, if you know anything about the Soviet Union, and I learned about this in courses in political science and so forth, in undergraduate days and so forth, was that in contrast to the United States, all things nuclear in the Soviet Union were combined into one institute, including nuclear reactors, nuclear missiles, propulsion systems. Anything nuclear was in the Kurchatov Institute. which contained 65,000 people. And Muradin Komakhov was the head of this laboratory. And he is the discovery of polycapillary optics, which it has to do with astronomy and the way that electromagnetic signals can propagate through crystalline materials and so forth. And this is what Hoover told me. And then we'll see why it's relevant, because George Knapp just came out with new information about this case a couple of weeks ago. He said, I'm just going to read you this very short section. Hoover said, they were having pickles and vodka when Komakhov told them that in the early 1980s, a giant flying disc hundreds of feet across had come over a Soviet missile installation in the Ukraine. This is most likely the same incident that occurred in the Carpathian Military District, which we know this is what it is, near the town of Bielorukhovich. Usovo is another town right there. We'll look at the map in a sec. On October 4th, 1982, the elliptical object hovered for about 15 minutes, and then suddenly many of the missiles entered launch mode, starting their ominous countdown sequence towards zero. Those are missiles aimed at the U.S. The missile operators could do nothing to override this situation. They panicked. And this is directly from Hoover telling me this, who got this directly from Komakhov over pickles and vodka. They could do nothing to override the situation. Now, keep in mind, unlike nuclear missiles in the U.S., which are controlled by 2 missile control launch officers per launch control facility, which controls 10 missiles at a time in the U.S. system. In the USSR, because the Soviet government never trusted anyone, including their own military, the government itself in Moscow had control over these missiles. This isn't something that the operators could launch themselves over various parts of the Soviet Union. All of their missile installations were hardwired in back to Moscow. Calls were made to Moscow. This alarming situation lasted until just 30 seconds before launch, which would have sent these thermonuclear weapons to their destinations. Then suddenly, everything went back to normal. After the incident, all the wires between that base and Moscow, according to Komakhov, were pulled out, examined, but there wasn't anything out of the ordinary. And again, this is not an isolated incident, because there were similar incidents in the U.S., but in most cases in the U.S., the missiles were just turned off, like we heard from Robert Salas at Maelstrom and some of the other bases in the northern tier SAC system in the U.S. So this is what initially Hoover told me. This is very interesting. It's coming from one of the top scientists who controls this huge nuclear lab in the USSR, is telling him just out of the blue. He just starts talking about this incident. And so from that incident, I thought that it was just one large disc. The way Hoover described it to me, I think Komakhov told him it was about 100 to 150 feet across, pretty sizable disc, a couple stories high, hovering over the area. And then the launch sequence starts. So let's take a look, first of all, at this is Muradin. This is some of the papers that he wrote. You can look it up. He was an expert in directed sources of electromagnetic radiation, directing neutral particles like neutrons and so forth. He lived from 1941 and passed on in 2014, just before Hoover talked about him to me. And again, he's an expert in this polycapillary optics and these systems for focusing X-rays, as you can see here in this crystalline sort of structure here. And there's this tribute to him on this Italian website, which I was able to locate this morning, and I'll put it again in the oh, here it is. Yeah. So here it is. This is the let me see if I can do the screen share here. So this is um this is the information about Komakhov and the conference he says he was at and so forth. So this is a very important person. Everyone really liked him. They said he was just a great person and a great scientist. And he's the one who just spontaneously started telling Hoover about this event. So at the time, it was a little challenging for me to find the location. I looked for Bielorussia, and because when the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 1990s, um, the names were changed. I couldn't find it, but because of George Knapp, so George Knapp recently decided to release all the documents that he took out of the Soviet Union in the early 90s when he visited the Soviet Union to get information um, uh, about UFO programs. And he has all this testimony from the military officers that served, which we'll look at in a second, at that missile silo in Bielorussia. But because, and George Knapp released this, I have the link in the description here. This is what we're talking about. It's this little town that is to the northwest of Kiev, Ukraine, nowadays. It's this area up here, north of Zhytomyr, and Kiev is over here, and we send all our best wishes and hope for the best for the people of Kiev, suffering from a lot of cold right now and the blackouts they've endured from these Russian drone and missile attacks recently over the past couple days. So this is the area that we're talking about. It's just to the northwest of Kiev. And so we have a lot more information now because George, and let me bring up the article about it here. This, you can see this is the article just from a couple days ago. From his site is mysterywire.com, which is part of his TV channel, KLAS in Las Vegas. You know, George Knapp started out as a debate coach, and I've been on his show a couple times on Coast to Coast. He interviewed me about Black Swan Ghosts a number of years ago when the book came out. He has the site Mystery Wire that he and here he is testifying in front of Congress just recently. This was probably the best congressional hearing we've had so far. I think if you listen to these witnesses, it was pretty riveting testimony about those electrostatic feelings some of them had as they saw these craft come over where they were. And a lot of very interesting information. And so Knapp recently came out and released these documents, which he smuggled out of the Soviet Union. Now, how did he actually do this? He said that the first page of each document had a classification stamp on it. So he just took off the first page and just had these other pages. And he could have gotten in a lot of trouble if someone had asked him what they were. But these are actually translations of the original documents. And let's take a look at these what these documents look like. This is one description of it. Let's go back a second to channel 8. So if we go up, scroll up, and this is linked in below in the you can see here are the original documents in Russian. Now, this is what's interesting on the Russian documents before we just get to the translation of what all these guys said, because we just have a lot of people backing up what Komakhov told Hoover right here. What we have in the original Soviet documents is the security stamps and so forth. But what's really interesting here is we have the drawings. This did not make it into the translation, which we'll read in a second. But we have the drawings. Now, here's what's interesting to me, folks, about the drawings. They don't all look like a big elliptical disc. Some of the people said they saw an elliptical disc, but other people said they just saw patterns of lights. This looks kind of like an elliptical disc, right? But some of them don't look like that. These are all the different military guys that are serving around this missile launch facility in Bielorussia, the actual missile silo, since the controls are actually at another location, but the launch controls are in that facility. They look like little dots and things. So that's one interesting thing I think to note here, is that we have 10 or so witnesses here describing all the same sorts of things during that day of August 4th, 1982. But they're different descriptions. And I mean, this is something we can talk about at another time. They are different descriptions. Some people saw triangular objects. I don't know exactly what to make of this. Komakhov only told Hoover, and Hoover only told me about this big elliptical disc. And if we look at this particular video, let's go back to this one. This guy, I don't know if you can hear this, but I will attempt to play it. Tell me if this is audible or not. Can you hear? Can you hear anything there? This is short, by the way.
Every person we spoke to in Bielorussia said they saw a flying saucer on that day. They told us it was huge, 900 feet in diameter. For hours, it hovered over the nearby ballistic missile base.
Can you guys see that?
As a missile engineer. It looked just like a flying saucer, the way they showed them in the movies.
So you can see that this guy is saying that it looked like an elliptical. You can't see any of the video or you can't hear it. What this guy is saying is that no video's coming through. Well, I will put the links in below in the description. This guy is saying you can't hear it. They're speaking in Russian anyway. But that's interesting. Look how he describes his hand. He saw the disc turn. One of the people in these documents describes it. We'll just get to that in a second. But they are describing one big disc. I don't know how to do the volume. I think I'm not sure how to get YouTube video through to you guys with the Ecamm app, but I'm describing you what they're saying. So they're saying that this was under the arms reduction treaty. This base was destroyed. Okay, thanks, Jules. You can see it, but so this guy was in the bunker when this event took place.
What happened next so alarmed the Soviet military leadership that a four-man commission was sent.
So there was a four-man commission to investigate this incident, including this is Command General Sokolov, I believe, who George Knapp got to meet. He's saying the missiles were preparing for launching. The missiles were preparing for launching, and they couldn't turn it off.
No one had touched any button.
You can see the pictures of it.
Any code. And yet, as the UFO hovered over the base, the control panel showed the missiles were preparing to launch.
So what they said is the missiles were preparing to launch. You can imagine, folks, how serious this is with thermonuclear weapons. This is pointing at the U.S. Here is a more recent article about it. This is also linked from IB Times, which I think is that it's a foreign publication. They go into this story again. They go into George Knapp releasing these particular accounts, which we'll just read shortly. The night the sky went mad over Usovo. So Knapp releasing this information is very helpful, just because I can see the location of it. I can compare it to what Hoover told me. Then let's just read a couple of these accounts. I mean, you have all of these. I'll put it on the screen again so you can watch. Let's see, where was it again? Yeah, here it is. So here's these accounts, and this is the original accounts, and this is the English translation. You can get both of these on the Mystery Wire site, which I've linked in the description. So the first one is from Polykev Valeria Alexievich was coming back from home on work on 4th of October. I observed a strange phenomena in the atmosphere about 5 to 6 kilometers above the village of Usovo. And he said he saw 2 bright shining objects resembling a New Year's Eve garland. That is like a branch of a pine tree. That's what a garland shape is. I actually had to look it up. So it's sort of like a small branch that we use to make Christmas wreaths and so forth. They were shining a bright golden light, and these lights were twinkling. There were 6 to 8 brightly shining spots making a circle in every object. So I'm just reading this to you because it sounds a little different than an elliptical object. The distance between the objects was 2 to 3 kilometers. So what Alexievich is describing is a whole bunch of different objects. Isn't that interesting? What I want to point out to you here is how challenging it is to get to the truth about some of these events that is slowly, I believe, coming out in our country here in the U.S. through these congressional hearings. And I think there's going to be more witnesses coming forward in the near future. And it's so many witnesses, and here it's years later. This is 82. We're decades later, and we're still finding out what people saw that day. So this guy's describing lots of separate objects for 5 to 7 minutes, moving slowly, changed its shape. The twinkling lights reformed from an ellipsis to a straight line. Ellipsis would be a series of dots. Then it turns into a straight line. Then it stretched down, an ellipsis appeared. Maybe that's what that guard was describing as the object tipped over. Lights are twinkling, changing color at an altitude of 5 kilometers above Usovo. So that's one of these. That's one of these accounts. And let's see if there's a picture for that one. We just have the security stamp at the end. Then we have another. Our children were scared that the object was going to fall down on us. In 10 minutes, another garland flourished at a large distance and went out. We went into the car and went home. The shining objects were not seen any longer. Captain Polykev. Polykev. That's his first name. Yeah. So here's another one. Captain Kovalenko, my wife and children, and the family of Captain Polykev, who we just heard from, was in the region. We saw this triangular-like drawing. Let's see what that looked like. It's kind of fun how so that's what these guys saw. The second witness, who was with the first witness we just heard, saw this sort of shape. And the light was seen for 20 minutes or more. And he said it was an altitude of 1.5 kilometers at a distance of 1,000 meters. It was an elliptical shape. Okay, so now we have another elliptical shape. There was no sound. This is Captain Kovalenko, chairman of the ACS department of MU 03389, whatever that turns out to be. Very interesting. The elliptical object. There's a security stamp. The next witness, Lieutenant Colonel Balanev. Isn't it just fascinating how many witnesses we have to this event? Same thing, 4th of October, 1982. He observed a luminescence in the sky for about 20 minutes. It went from pale yellow to dark cherry. 5 constellations were seen distinctly, whatever that means. They were situated as shown in this drawing. Let's see what the drawing looks like. Aha! Is that it? Hard to say exactly. Or is it this one? Yes, this here, situation 5 objects. It's just fascinating. Okay. So this is near a town called Parabrody, Osovo, Usovo, uh, however you pronounce that, Usovo, Parabrody down to Bielokorovich. I saw shining lights in the sky, and I didn't see the lights. They were near Osovo. The lights were disposed indefinitely. This is a translation issue, folks. There were about 10 lights in number. So we're just getting a lot of variation in what, I mean, it's either a lot of variation. You guys can tell me what you think. Or they're seeing different lights or seeing them from different points of view. Or maybe they look different to different witnesses. Here's Captain Pavlovich. When our bus stopped at a turn, we got out of the bus. We saw a bright luminescence. The spots were changing, and it went out, and then they were kind of going out slowly, one after the other. And then 10 minutes later, another luminescence showed up. He's not just saying a big elliptical thing hovering over the base. A luminescence appeared at some distance from the first. It was the shape of a circle inclined to the earth. That's sort of what the other people are describing, right? The twinkling light was seen until we reached Topilny, and that's when the last time I saw it. And then we have another witness. Oh, this is where it starts getting interesting. Here's another person who was on a bus. They shot lights of a golden color. This is Lieutenant Colonel Povar, VP. He was coming back from work on the bus. He saw the lights, and it resembled a helicopter shape, just in pattern, not in motion. Then we have Lieutenant Colonel Zinkovsky Victor Stefanovich. And this, okay, now this is an interesting account. He first thought it was a helicopter, right? Oh, that's the next guy. And this is the spots that they changed in different shapes. The next witness, Major Lipzeki, VS, he was coming back from work with Captain Ryabinin from the missile silo or from that area on the Parabrody Usovo Road. They saw a luminescence. Yeah, it's quite a bunch of high-ranking people in charge of nuclear weapons. So these are people that are trained to be very observant and really do their jobs well. We stopped at the Usovo Bielokorovich crossing, and they saw these pale yellow to red lights. Fits what the other witness said, pale yellow to cherry red. But here's where I thought it got kind of interesting. What they say is the steering wheel began to tremble in the captain's hands, and the front wheels of the car began to tremble too, as if the road wasn't even. But when he went out to check the wheels, everything seemed fine. And then he tried to drive the car, and for another 100 meters, everything really shook and rumbled, even though the road wasn't rough. Go figure, some electromagnetic interference. Here's another report from Senior Lieutenant Alexandrovich. Saw a bright double spot at angle on the horizon. Let's see if we can find it in the Russian document here. Oh yeah, here's one. It looks triangular. All sorts of shapes here. Two groups of lights were seen twinkling irregularly. They were forming a kite. Like this, right? You can see this right here, this kind of kite-like shape. So there are some consistencies here. And then as they approached it, there was some movement. They lost sight of the lights, and then they couldn't see them anymore. So we have a kite-like shape. And then, okay, now this is where I found it to be really interesting here. This next account, number 10. Oh, this is the last one. This is, I think, the kite-like shape, right? Anyway, you can look at these documents yourself if you're interested. Here's where I thought it got interesting, was in number 10. This is the Senior Assistant of Communication Service Commander of MU, what is that, Missile Unit 52035, dealing with AC power, I guess power computer systems. This is where it's very interesting. He describes exactly what they saw on their displays here. And it's just different display systems. We don't know exactly what this means, but they put an asterisk here. And this is where the launch codes appeared. Now, this is what I didn't hear from Hoover. Maybe Komakhov told him it didn't make it into Hoover's translation to me, Hoover's rendition of the story, simply because we had all heard that the launch sequence was initiated. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this might have happened in South Dakota too, at one of the missile installations there in that base, wherever the base is in South Dakota. It wasn't Minot, it was the one, Ellsworth, right? We've heard about cases of those Ellsworth guards, and I think I remember hearing about, listening to some of them talk on Coast to Coast, if I'm not mistaken, about seeing balls detach from the main craft, move around. Very scary situation for them in Ellsworth. Well, what we learned here was that not only were the missile launch systems initiated, the correct code combination was entered into the console. In other words, the missiles can't launch even if you get the engines ready for launch until the correct code is entered somewhere along the line. From my understanding, it would have to have been back in Moscow, right? Since these missile control launch officers actually didn't control the launch, they just supervised the facility and made sure it worked. So here we're told, that was new information to me, that the control combination was entered into the console. As if whoever, I mean, it's happening at the same time that these object is over the installation, right? And then the code, it's not just so the reason I'm bringing this up is when we've heard about these cases in the US, whether it's at Maelstrom, Ellsworth, Minot. Remember I had that missile security guard, Gary. I got to interview him in Aurora, Colorado, next to Denver, and he was a missile security guard and talked about these strange objects seen when he was on patrol and so forth, that took off vertically near the missile silos and so forth. Jets are scrambled and so forth. Those were when those missile systems were brought offline. But here we're being told that it's not just an electromagnetic pulse. See the explanation. The reason this matters is we know that the missile security guards in the U.S. gave testimony to Kirkpatrick and Arrow. Some of them talked about this. You could hear their testimony when they talked to George Knapp and in other interviews. They, yeah, I agree, Jules. Gary was very believable. They told this to Arrow, right? And do you remember what Arrow's explanation was for the Maelstrom, I believe, 66 event? Or was it 66, 67? Where 10 missiles at a time are taken offline, and then it happens both at Echo and I believe the Oscar missile silos, the missile facilities, right? Arrow issued this statement that what happened was that there was a test electromagnetic pulse device installed over the base that nobody saw. A huge Tesla coil that somehow none of the security guards ever saw, and they were testing the resilience of these missile installations to EMP pulses. Yeah, right. Michigan, Bob. I mean, it's it's just ridiculous. In light of this testimony, this Arrow stuff seems absolutely ridiculous. It seems ridiculous because we're told by one of the guards here, right here, controlled code combination at 21:38. This is European 24-hour time. That would be at 9:38, right at night. That is not created by any EMP pulse, right? That's a code combination that somehow migrates into the electronics. The Arrow, so this totally destroys the Arrow argument, folks. This is sort of why I'm bringing this up. As we have new evidence here, it just, sorry guys, control code combinations, you don't get that from an EMP generator. Even that silly explanation, because these things are huge, they said it was over the base, but nobody saw it. Like the security guards that are out there 24/7, whose job is just to look up in the skies and look for something that could threaten the integrity of the base. They never see this huge Tesla coil up there. Come on. So, I mean, it's ridiculous. And this proves that the Arrow explanation for these events is silly. Now, one point about this. He did say that there had been a thunderstorm earlier on in July of that year, a couple months earlier, that blew a fuse. And that there was some weakness in the power system at the same time. Now, I guess some people could argue that perhaps this is the U.S. I mean, right? I mean, maybe this is some U.S. secret planes, secret drones back in '82, right? Playing around with the Soviet missile installations. But the problem with that explanation is these missiles were put into launch mode, pointed at the U.S., and according to Komakhov, or these accounts that you can read in these different articles that I'm mentioning here, that these were pointed at us. So there is absolutely no conceivable way the U.S. military would be testing Soviet military installations by initiating the launch sequence, getting so close to countdown. In these documents, I think it said 15 seconds before launch. We're told that people turned gray, their hair turned gray instantly from the realization of what could happen. This could have launched World War III. And Eric Davis, in his recent interview with, I believe it was the Soul Foundation, Dr. Peter Skafish on the Soul Foundation YouTube channel, interviewed Dr. Eric Davis, who we learned a lot more from, a very interesting interview. He talked about being a defense contractor studying UFOs for DOD and so forth. And you can listen to the interview. It's on the Soul Foundation channel, and he goes into Roswell crash. He just thought it was one object. He goes into the UFOs that has begun film of how that started, and then mysteriously, before it's released to the public, it gets pulled back, funded by NASA, DOD, Edwards Air Force Base. Really, it's right on YouTube right now. UFOs It Has Begun. The second edition with Jacques Vallée was UFOs Past, Present, and Future. And it's a serious documentary about UFOs. They don't make fun of it for a second, as if the government under the Nixon administration was very close to disclosing, because the funding for this came from Edwards Air Force Base and NASA, and it's filmed in the Pentagon. One of the people involved, what was his name? Bill. He's in the movie a lot. Apparently, he was the one, this Air Force captain, that was the guy that kept pushing for this to be finished. And so there were people back then. Disclosure effort has been going on a long time. But in any case, does this show hostility, as Eric Davis said? I mean, what is this telling us? I don't know exactly. Or someone saying, look, these nukes are a bad idea. We can control them. You humans are in control. I don't know exactly what it means. Does it show malicious intent? Is it trying to say, hey, you guys are playing with fire? You can tell me. Robert Emenegger, right, Joel? So Robert Emenegger was the producer along with another fellow, Adam Sandler, I believe his name was. Emmenegger and Sandler were contacted to produce this documentary. Emmenegger came from an advertising agency, and he was President Nixon's, worked in his press group, worked for Nixon. So they contacted him, and they were going to fund this, and it's all filmed. You can see it on YouTube right now, and it's really like a Twilight Zone documentary about UFOs. Nothing funny about it. Cases of people being abducted. They have pictures of what the creatures look like. So here's the interesting thing, guys, about that film. And I heard lectures about this film many times from different speakers at UFO conferences over the past couple of decades, including Grant Cameron from Canada, who had studied it. At the end, you see this object descending, which is allegedly, over a desert area. It's coming down, a light. This is allegedly real film footage of an ET craft landing at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. This is the real deal. And they were, there's a book, by the way. Okay, so this is interesting. One more thing about Hoover. He got to see in 1973, he was in the Capcom, the Command Communication Room, for a Skylab mission in 1973. Before we had the space shuttle, there was Skylab. And one of the astronauts, Owen Garriott, and you can read about it in Black Swan Ghosts, Owen Garriott is talking over the radio saying, we're seeing red lights out the window. And he says, I'm getting a picture of it. Hoover attempted, when this finished, to get the pictures. And he was told, oh, you have to wait till they're developed. He calls up the guy in the photo section of NASA who's in charge of the photo lab, who's a friend of his. And the guy says, the pictures didn't come out. This is what Hoover told me. The pictures didn't come out. Because there's a book called UFOs Past, Present, and Future. I have a copy of it. And so here's the deal. The guy then later said, oh, it was just Owen Garriott. It's lights from inside the capsule reflecting off the window. And then Hoover said, how is that possible, since the lens of the camera they're using, the Hasselblad camera, that really good camera that they used, the Apollo astronauts used on the moon, it's designed to fit exactly in the window diameter. So there is no reflection, right? Well, anyway, the book comes out, UFOs Past, Present, and Future. And Hoover told me that he was here in Boulder, Colorado, and for a conference at CU, I believe. And he goes into a bookstore here and he sees the book UFOs Past, Present, and Future. He opens it up and there is a picture of the red lights that Owen Garriott filmed, which again told him that they had been completely lying to him. I mean, they had really captured something that they didn't even want him to see. So, really incredible. And so you can find this book, UFOs Past, Present, and Future. Anyway, it's a whole production. It's part of UFO disclosure history here in the U.S. that got forgotten about because it was never released in movie theaters. I believe it was shown on CBS in 1974, we're told, once. And very strange story. So that is the interesting thing about it, is that that movie was a very serious attempt to disclose it, but it's sort of taken away from us. So the final account here is this is another report. Oh, this is the same, I think it's the same report. Let's see if there's other ones. Or is this just duplicated? In any case, folks, you can yeah, so this is, so you can, I have all the links in the description. And in the final few minutes, if we have any questions about this, I just think this is a very interesting case because in my mind, simply that one missile officer talking here saying that the control codes were entered, that totally annihilates the Arrow argument that these are EMP tests, that this is what Salas and others experienced. I mean, it's ridiculous just on the face of it, right? Oh, what is showing? Sorry, something's over the. Is there a screen showing, or did we? Um, okay, so I mean, obviously this explanation doesn't make sense because you would have seen some sort of huge Tesla coils over the base. I mean, and those bases were designed to be hardened against such an event. And I think it was Sylvania, the contractor for those missile installations, at least in the northern tier, that investigated and said they couldn't find an explanation for what happened. They didn't say it was an EMP pulse. They said they couldn't explain it. And again, all of those missiles in the system here in the US are on separate circuits. So why they would all go down. You remember in um, another really fascinating case that we heard from was uh, David Shindele, who spoke at the citizen hearing in Washington, D.C. at the National Press Club in 2013. And he talked about this is in one of the chapters too. Or was it a YouTube? I made some videos about Shindele's presentation. I mean, this is the same sort of thing where he talked about this happening at his base in Minot, North Dakota. And he wrote this book, which is what they told him. It never happened, right? So this is obviously pretty serious stuff. He's the guy in control of the missile silo, along with another officer, David Shindele. And he was furious about this. They had UFO reports that morning on the news. He comes to work, all the missiles are offline. It's a really serious issue because these guys are graded by their missile uptime stats. They're all offline. So this is what Shindele, yeah, Jules, that is the link. So this is the final thing I'll say that connects to this. This is a big topic, but we've already covered an hour here. But just to finish this story about David Shindele, he writes this book, It Never Happened, because they told him, you'll never talk about this incident. So the technicians come to repair the missile control guidance systems, put them online again. And they ask him what happened, since he was in charge of one of these launch control facilities. And because he had been told not to talk about it again, he couldn't even tell the Air Force repair crew who's coming to fix the missiles what had happened. They told him, don't even tell your wife, not your sweetie, if I'm quoting correctly, nobody. So if this is just EMP tests, guys, it doesn't fit with that sort of response at all. And obviously, there's no way they're going to perform tests like that and not tell the people in control of live missiles, they're underground, what's going on, the danger. But I just think, thanks to George Knapp, and there are other documents too that I haven't looked at, that something called Thread 3, which was the Soviet UFO recovery programs, crash retrieval, and so forth programs. Thread 3, that was their program about it. So I mean, I think just this case alone shows us that Arrow has never been doing a real investigation about this, because the EMP explanation does not explain how the control combination codes are entered into the system. There's no way. And so we have this happening in the Soviet Union, we have it happening here, probably happened other places. And I just say, folks, this is a very serious issue, whether it's nuclear missiles or whatever sort of interactions we're having with this phenomena, whether it's the Nimitz incidents, whether it's people like Travis Walton, and all the other sightings we've had, and all the implications. And now Lukatsky, I'm still going through Lukatsky's newer books, where he talks about these recovery programs, different samples that have been recovered from these craft, and his statement that a UFO sighting is more than a UFO sighting. connected to Skinwalker Ranch. And the same thing that Jacques Vallée once told me when I was talking with him at an IRVA conference. Jacques Vallée was part of the remote viewing program for a while. He knew Ingo Swann. And he said to me directly, this is not little guys getting in their metal ship coming from some other planet. It's a lot more than that, because there are these psychic effects even before the encounters, afterwards. And this challenges our really nuts and bolts idea of what UFOs are that seems attractive to our mechanistic, materialistic minds that like an explanation like that, right? But it just seems like it's more than that. It's more complex than that. But they do seem to interact with our technologies. And in this case, they seem to scare the bejesus out of those missile control launch officers in the Soviet Union. I mean, I imagine 15 or 30 seconds left before launch. It's just crazy. It's almost impossible to imagine. Those missiles, we're told, could reach the U.S. in 25 minutes. So in any case, I've said enough here, guys. Thanks for listening. Any questions? Appreciate you being here tonight, and anything you'd like to ask about this or so forth. I've seen a lot of good questions. Yeah, so Black Swan Ghosts, I'm happy to send you a signed copy. You can get it on Amazon. And this has now, I believe, like 18 cases like this. Each one is stranger and more startling than the next, from just all sorts of, oh no, we've got 28 chapters in here. So a lot of different witnesses. I even have stories from someone I met at a conference who had been asked to examine these materials. And he said, and this is a real top level computer scientist engineer who's still alive. And he told me this was not from Earth. The isotopic ratios of the chemical compounds do not match the isotope ratios you find on Earth. It had to be from some other part of the galaxy, which is the same thing that Dr. Roger Lear told me once at the Citizen hearing, when he talked about these implant removals and the analysis, the electron microscope analysis of these materials. He said they were from far away, another part of the Milky Way. This is very similar to what this scientist told me. And I imagine there are a lot of people that have been asked to look at these materials. Okay, guys, let's take a look. Any questions? Yes, Shelley, a few questions. You can think out loud. Either way. Yeah, I mean, the Tesla coil was more than an EMP blast. I'm kind of being funny about it a little bit, Shelley. You're right. It wasn't literally just a Tesla coil just for zapping them. I don't think it ever existed out there at Maelstrom. As far as I can see, there's just no evidence these things. There were plans to build this. I don't see any evidence anywhere that it was actually done. Maybe it was done at some test range. It certainly wasn't done at live missile installations. That would just be completely irresponsible, incomprehensible. But yeah, obviously Tesla was involved in resonant communication, sending energy through space and so forth. And yeah, UFOs past, present, and future. That, if you haven't seen it, that is really interesting, because it'll just give you another angle on this. A real government movie about UFOs where they're not debunking, they're not scoffing. It was these Air Force officers, they're in the Pentagon, they're telling you about all these encounters with their planes, how serious this is. And then finally, they go into CIA channeling of these entities in orbit, where there were this woman in Maine trained some CIA officers how to channel. I'm serious, they have channeling in this movie. And they were training CIA officers how to channel aliens. And it says in the movie at one point, they say to this guy channeling this alien, "Can we see your craft?" And he says, "Look out the window in about 3 seconds." And they look out, and there's some strange object moving. They call up the control tower from the nearest airport, and they say, "Nope, we don't have any planes up there right now." I mean, this is in the movie. So it really makes you think, whoa, in the 70s, the Nixon administration was very close. You remember where he's purportedly had that experience with Jackie Gleason, who was his neighbor in the Keys in Florida, who took him to, is it Eglin Air Force Base underground, and Nixon allegedly showed Gleason this story. His wife, Beverly Kittredge, Gleason's wife, talked about Gleason coming back really pale, and it seemed really shocked. So this could have been happening, and what we're seeing now could be just the tip of the disclosure iceberg. In other words, folks, this could go well beyond what we're capable of imagining the consequences could be, because there have been these steps towards disclosure and then back for decades now from within the U.S. government. It probably goes back and forth. Why they pulled this movie at the last minute, why Edward said we don't want to show it. It's all finished, all fund ready to go, but it still exists. I mean, is it this what Richard Hoover was told by NASA? We have this timeline. We don't want to go faster than this timeline. It goes out decades. Well, I think the gig is up here. I really think we're going to have a snowball effect. I don't think it's going to be a linear disclosure, a slow leak. I think you're going to have more witnesses. I just heard one recently. I forgot his name already. It was from a couple of weeks ago. Someone pretty high up in the military, worked in Air Force research projects. He talked about knowing about these UFO crash retrieval programs and so forth. And I've talked to a lot of people who've known people in these crash retrieval programs. In fact, even Gary, who I mentioned on my, he let me interview him. He's on my YouTube channel. You can look for Missile Security Guard. There was a second video I made where he told me he had been offered to go on UFO crash retrieval programs. They said it was long duration missions to look for crashed vehicles. And when he inquired what they meant, he was told point blank UFOs. That's what he said. No, it wasn't aircraft that disappeared, missing aircraft or anything like that. It was UFOs. He spoke to people who came back from these missions. They only allowed people who didn't have families to go on these missions because they had to be out there for months, slowly excavating these vehicles. And part of his job would have been just to create diversions around these areas, just as a guard, to disguise it as some other operation, so the public wouldn't find out what was going on. So, I mean, I've spoken to people who know about these programs, and I think it's just very highly likely that this really happens. People who looked at the materials, and they're under these NDAs, so they can't really come forward yet. And I guess it's going to take some presidential directive to give these people immunity so they can talk in front of Congress. They don't seem to want to talk in front of Congress, even though Congress has subpoena power. You've heard these discussions. So in any case, any questions here? Okay, Shelley. Something involving something in a room reaching out into another space and picking up something off a table and pulling it back into where it was. That is strange. That's strange. Very interesting. I've heard about that with cryptids and Bigfoot, are kind of reaching through walls and things. That sounds like what you're talking about, but you can elaborate a little bit. Now, Samuel Salmanuel, hello. Yes, that was Mrs. Swan. It's in the movie. They mentioned her name, Mrs. Swan, in Maine, who taught them how to channel an alien. Can you believe this is actually in this freaking movie? Channeling aliens. I mean, now it's so like, oh, it's not, UFOs don't even exist, and there's no evidence. And here they are in the 70s telling you, filmed in the Pentagon. At the end, it says the credits, NASA, DOD, everyone paid for this. Channeling aliens. I mean, we haven't even tried this in our RV group. Maybe we should try this, Jules. We should channel aliens. I mean, there are people that do. Daryl Anka, Bashar. I listen to Bashar, hear what the Essassani, have to say. There are channels of aliens, but this wasn't to like an audience. This was just some random alien that was up there. So no, Shelley. I mean, it's an interesting question, and if you can give us an example of this is a very interesting idea. Yes, the alien's name Apu, something like that. They're talking about the alien's name in a DoD funded movie about UFOs. It's a serious movie. right from the beginning. It's hosted by Rod Serling. Very, very interesting. AFA, right. That's what it was. It was AFA. Thank you. Just fascinating stuff. Well, anyway, folks, it looks like we're getting more information about this. Thanks again to George Knapp for getting those documents in the 90s, taking a great risk to his personal safety to bring them to the U.S. And finally, he said he's going to be releasing all the documents, releasing them on the Mystery Wire channel so we can read the originals. What were the findings of the people who came to fix it? What fix what? What was that? Oh, they never found anything wrong with any of the wiring between Moscow and the USSR base in Bielorussia. That's what Komakhov said. There was nothing wrong with the system. They pulled out. Hoover said that Komakhov told them they pulled out every wire between that area in Kyiv and Moscow. It's a long distance. That's thousands of kilometers. Wired. They pulled every wire out to look for something, and they couldn't find anything wrong. And that's what I'm told Sylvania found too when they looked at Maelstrom, because there's a witness who I had here, Joy French. Now, Joy French is a witness I have in this Black Swan Ghosts who told me about her mysterious time loss at, I think, is it Mount Rainier, with a friend when a light came down on their car and the car stalls, the radio interference, and the missing time. All of a sudden, they're back in their separate homes. They don't know how they got back there in their beds again. She told me that her husband worked for Sylvania. I've actually never said this before. Her husband worked for Sylvania as a technician on the missiles in Maelstrom. So this woman, Joy French, it's just think of the connections here. Her husband works for Sylvania. Has a security clearance sufficient to work on nuclear missiles out at Maelstrom and other bases. And then she has this encounter, I believe, Mount Rainier, I believe, just meeting a friend, driving down to get a video, to watch a video. Those days when we would go down to the video store to rent a video, and then having this missing time incident, lights coming down on them. He gets out. And then he's driving the car. She can't remember the sequence of events. Then they're separate. They meet the next day at a cafe nearby. And they can't figure out what happened. And they agree not to talk about it. And her husband was the one who worked on these missiles. And she told me he told her that there were strange things about the operation of these missiles that he could never explain at that time. So just very interesting how all these witnesses come together and these people pass on. So we have to put the information together the best we can. So, yes, anything else before we break for tonight? Thank you very much. Well, thank you, guys. Thanks for being here. This is a very interesting topic. We'll be looking forward. It's very technical in some ways, but it's just very interesting, the actual history of it, what organizations like Arrow are telling us, which we can see is just not the real deal here. And the witnesses that have talked to Arrow said they were not a really, they did a pretty bad job. And they weren't even sure if they were just trying to see how much information had leaked out to the public. In other words, Arrow already knew what was going on, and they were just using this investigative role to kind of detect if there had been leaks in classified programs. You kind of understand it. So we will get to the bottom of this, because in my view, the truth has a way of coming out. I was there in Europe in 1989 in Austria working at a research institute, an international research institute, when the East Germany started to collapse just because people had come over the wall. They didn't want to go back. They were over in Vienna. They lost control of the situation, and it spiraled out of control, and that, the whole East Bloc ceased to exist starting in 89. So, these things can happen unexpectedly. Just this truth has a way of building. People communicate. We've got better communication systems now than ever. And if you have facts like this coming out, it has repercussions. And I'm confident eventually it'll just percuss in a way, the repercussions will percuss in a way that leads to more information coming out, because this has to do with new types of science and technology. It's something we should all be involved in, because it's just a fascinating chapter in our development, and to find out who else is here with us. Who are these visitors? What are their intentions? If they're malevolent, as Eric Davis argues, I mean, just show us the evidence. That's even more reason to talk about it. So it's a big issue, and I think we'll be finding out more. But thanks again, and thanks to George Knapp again for giving us these documents. Shelley's saying, "Oh, you're saying it could be a hitchhiker that came in and reached through a wall, took a buck. Interesting idea." Jules and I have heard cases like this from our Bigfoot Zoom group of people talking about things going through walls. Shelley, this is not something we haven't heard about before. We've heard witnesses of hearing strange animals walk through walls that the entire family saw. Very interesting stuff. But again, it fits with what Lukatsky's telling us is possible from his research at Skinwalker Ranch. So we're all part of the disclosure experience. Yeah, we're just part of it. And tonight we were part of another little part of it. Right. So that's right, Cell Manual. That's what Kirkpatrick said is part of what they were doing. I was just finding out what had leaked. Right. So that's not a very that is not a very honest use of arrow, because you're bringing in witnesses. They complained that they had signed NDAs. They weren't supposed to talk about this outside of these SAP, these special access programs. And here Kirkpatrick's saying, well, just tell us what you know. I mean, they're not even sure they're supposed to. So it's very problematic. Okay, guys, thanks very much. We will see you next time. Take care for now, and we'll talk to you soon. Good night. Bye.